The alien princess, Zaraha, looked down at the human soldier in front of her with an expression of indifference. She had heard stories about Earth and its inhabitants, stories that painted them as weak, fragile creatures who could barely defend their own planet. Zarya had been sent to Earth as part of a diplomatic mission, and she was not impressed. Standing before her was a human who seemed no different from the countless others she had seen in the reports. He was shorter than her, with a rough, unpolished appearance. His uniform was simple and worn, clearly showing signs of battle. He didn't possess the gleaming armor or high-tech weapons that many of her own people used. His brown eyes were calm, almost too calm, like he had seen far too much to be startled by anything. He gave a slight nod when they were introduced, but his posture and voice didn't scream of authority or strength. "I trust you're well," Zarya said, her voice cold, yet formal. She had been raised to view her own species as superior. The advanced technology, the towering cities, the centuries of power, they all made her believe that no one could match her race. Even humans, she thought, were no exception. Their small size, their primitive ways couldn't possibly compare to the glory of her people. The soldier, whose name was Ethan, stood there without flinching. "I'm fine, Your Highness," he replied simply. "How about you?" Zarya's gaze lingered on him for a moment longer. There was something about him that made her pause, but she couldn't place what it was. She dismissed the thought immediately. There was no reason for her to waste time on a human. "Let's get this over with, then," Zarya muttered under her breath, her mind already focused on the mission at hand. She had heard that the humans were eager to prove themselves, and so she decided to set up a test. A series of challenges to show her people that Earth, despite its size and fragility, had something worth acknowledging. "Gather the others," she said, her voice now commanding. The soldiers around her obeyed immediately, stepping aside to allow Ethan to follow. He said nothing, only nodded, and kept pace with her as they moved through the sleek halls of the alien spacecraft. The arena was unlike anything Ethan had ever seen. It was a massive open space, with towering walls of shimmering metal and a floor that seemed to shift and change with every step. The design was clearly alien, but Ethan had seen many strange things in his time serving in the military. Nothing about this was going to intimidate him. Zarya watched him closely as he entered the arena, his eyes scanning the surroundings. He looked calm, but there was a quiet determination behind those brown eyes. She couldn't help but feel a little impressed. Yes, humans were resilient after all. They had survived countless wars, natural disasters, and cosmic threats. "First challenge," she declared, her voice echoing across the arena. "A test of strength. Show us what you've got, human." Ethan's lips twitched slightly, but he didn't respond with arrogance or confidence like many of the other soldiers she had faced. Instead, he simply moved to the center of the arena and began the task. It was a strength test. He would have to move a heavy object, an alien device that seemed to weigh several tons. A feat that Zarya thought no human could possibly accomplish. The onlookers, aliens from various races, watched eagerly. Expected Ethan to fail, and Zarajat, despite her initial curiosity, was sure he would. She couldn't see how he could possibly lift the heavy object with his small frame. Her people were far stronger, taller, and more capable. But then Ethan moved. Slowly, cautiously at first, he placed his hands on the device and began to lift. At first, it seemed like he would be unsuccessful, but then something shifted. His muscles tensed, and with a final push, the object shifted off the ground. Inch by inch, Zarya's eyes widened as she watched the human soldier lift the object with more ease than she had anticipated. Her thoughts raced. She had underestimated him. She had thought humans were weak, that they lacked the necessary power to perform such feats. But there he was, effortlessly performing what had been meant as a test of strength. He didn't even look particularly strained as he finished moving the device to its designated spot. A few of the other alien spectators muttered among themselves, clearly surprised at his ability. Zarya, however, remained silent, her pride refusing to acknowledge that the human had passed the test. But there was something else. Who was this human, really? How had he achieved that feat? Zarya knew nothing about humans aside from what her people had learned through observation. But in this moment, she realized that what she knew might not be enough to understand them fully. She nodded, a signal for Ethan to proceed with the next challenge. As he moved to the next station, Zarya tried to shake off the unsettling feeling in her chest. She had a mission to complete, and humans were far from being worthy of her attention. Yet something about this soldier intrigued her. She couldn't ignore it. She stood there in silence, watching him with narrowed eyes. But it was hard to deny that the human had proven something important that day. He was not as small as she had once thought. After the strength test, Zarya could not shake off the feeling of surprise. The human soldier had exceeded her expectations in a way that made her question everything she thought she knew about his species. But she wasn't about to let her curiosity show. She was a princess, a leader of her people. She couldn't be seen as weak or uncertain. Still, there was something about this human that kept drawing her in. It annoyed her. As the soldiers around her gathered for the next challenge, Zarya quickly regained her composure. She had been trained to remain unshaken by anything, no matter how unexpected. The humans, no matter how resilient they seemed, were still far from being a match for her own people. Next, Zarya announced, her voice cold and commanding. A test of speed and agility. We'll see if the human can keep up with the best of us. Ethan stood tall, his expression calm as always, not a hint of nervousness or arrogance in his eyes. The human soldier simply nodded and stepped forward, ready for whatever came next. The arena shifted again, its floor becoming a series of narrow, twisting platforms suspended in midair, with walls that seemed to close in from all sides. The task was simple. Ethan would need to cross the platforms without falling. Navigating through the obstacles that would challenge his speed and agility, Zarya looked at him with disdain. She had seen her own soldiers perform the same challenge. With ease, the alien competitors had been quick, their reflexes sharp, and their movements fluid. She didn't expect the human to do much better than before, if at all. Start, Zarya ordered, and with that, Ethan began the course. At first, his movements were slow, deliberate, as though he were carefully planning his every step. Alien soldiers in the stands murmured to each other, shaking their heads as they watched. It was clear to them that the human wasn't built for this kind of task. His frame was too small, his legs too short. He was too human, but as the challenge progressed, something unexpected happened. Ethan's pace began to quicken. His steps became more confident, more fluid. He leaped from one platform to the next with surprising speed, landing each jump with perfect precision. There was no hesitation in his movements, only a focused determination. Zarya couldn't believe her eyes. How was he doing this? Expected him to stumble, to fall, to fail. But the human seemed to have an almost unnatural ability to navigate the difficult course. Every jump, every movement, was done with a quiet ease that made Zarya question her previous judgments. By the time Ethan reached the final platform, he had completed the course faster than most of the aliens had. The crowd was silent for a moment, unsure of what they had just witnessed. Zarya stood frozen, watching the human soldier as he made his way to the edge of the course. Breathing steadily, as though the challenge had been nothing more than a warm-up, Ethan looked up at Zarya, his eyes meeting hers with the same calm demeanor he had maintained since their first meeting. "I'm done," he said simply, his voice steady. Zarya felt a wave of frustration rise within her. She couldn't let this human continue to impress her. She was the princess of a powerful alien race, and she couldn't let one human soldier make a mockery of her people. Yet despite her best efforts to ignore it, she couldn't help but respect his abilities. Zarya's thoughts were interrupted by a loud cheer from the alien spectators. The crowd erupted in applause, some even standing in admiration of Ethan's impressive performance. She could see the admiration in their eyes, and it only fueled her growing frustration. She could feel a shift in the air, a change in the way the humans were being perceived. What if Ethan wasn't just an exception? What if humans, as a whole, were capable of things that her people had never considered? Zarya couldn't let her thoughts wander down that path, but the possibility lingered. "What's your next challenge, princess?" Ethan asked, his voice breaking through her thoughts. Zarya hesitated. She was about to issue another task, when she realized something important. She had been so focused on proving the superiority of her race that she had overlooked something far more dangerous. The human's calmness, his quiet confidence, had made her question everything. She had always thought that strength, agility, and intelligence were the only factors that determined a species' worth. But Ethan had shown her something different. She had seen the courage in his eyes, the focus in his every movement. It wasn't just strength or skill, it was something deeper, hidden power, something that couldn't be measured by the typical tests she had set. Ethan's humanity was his greatest strength. Instead of issuing another challenge, Zarya found herself staring at the human soldier, her mind racing with thoughts she didn't want to have. The princess of a powerful race, questioning the worth of her own people because of one human. It was an unsettling thought, but there was no denying it. "Next time, we'll test your intelligence," Zarya said, her voice more controlled than before. She couldn't afford to show any weakness. The human had proven himself in physical strength, but Zarya was determined to show him that intelligence and strategy were where her people truly excelled. Ethan nodded, accepting the new challenge with the same calmness that had characterized his every move so far. There was no arrogance in his eyes, just a quiet readiness. Zarya couldn't help but admire that, despite the deep uncertainty building inside her. She couldn't wait to see what he would do next. The princess turned her back and began to walk away, but not before giving the human one last lingering glance. For the first time, she couldn't shake the feeling that maybe, just maybe, she had underestimated him. The next morning, Zarya stood before the large window in her personal chamber, staring out at the vastness of the galaxy. Her mind was still reeling from the events of the day before. Ethan, the human soldier, had outperformed all her expectations. Not only had he completed the strength test with ease, but he had also shown impressive speed and agility in the challenge. Zarya had dismissed him at first as a mere human, but now she wasn't so sure. She had seen the same look in his eyes that she had seen in the warriors of her own people: determination, resilience, and strength. It was as though there was something inside of him, something hidden deep beneath the surface, that made him more than just a small human. Zarya's thoughts were interrupted by the sudden opening of the door. She turned to see one of her advisors, a tall alien named Corin. "Entering the room, Your Highness," Corin said, his voice respectful. "I've been reviewing the reports on the human soldier, Ethan. His performance in the tests has raised some concerns." Zarya raised an eyebrow. "What concerns?" Corin stepped forward, holding a datapad in his hands. "It seems that human soldiers, despite their size and apparent weaknesses, possess an unusual endurance and ability to adapt quickly in combat. The reports from our intelligence networks suggest that humans have developed unique combat strategies, different from anything we've encountered." Zarya crossed her arms. "And why is this concerning?" Corin hesitated for a moment before continuing. "Because we have underestimated them. For too long, we have believed that strength, technology, and speed are the only factors that determine a species' power. But these humans, this soldier in particular, show that there is something more. Their ability to adapt, their intelligence in battle, may be a hidden weapon that we've failed to recognize." Zarya's eyes narrowed. She hadn't anticipated this. She had always been taught that her people were the most advanced, that no species could match their technology or fighting skills. The idea that humans could possess something that her people didn't was both intriguing and troubling. "Do you suggest we take action?" Zarya asked, her voice steady. Corin paused before answering. "I believe it would be wise to observe them further. Perhaps they have more to offer than we realize." Zarya nodded slowly. "I'll make the decision." "Thank you, Corin. You may go." As Corin left the room, Zarya's mind raced. She had seen something in Ethan's performance. That day, something that no one could have predicted. His calm demeanor, his confidence, his ability to overcome challenges that seemed impossible to her people. Those were qualities that didn't fit with her initial beliefs about humans. She knew it was time for a different approach. The next test would be different. It would not be about strength, speed, or agility. It would be a test of intellect, of strategy. Zaria knew that her people excelled in those areas, and she was confident that she could prove, once and for all, that humans had no place in the galactic hierarchy. The next day, Zarya summoned Ethan to the training chamber. As he entered, he gave her a polite nod, but there was no arrogance in his movements. He was calm, as always. Zarya found herself, once again, admiring his composure. This time, human, Zarya began. You will face a different kind of challenge. This test is one of intellect and strategy. You will need to outthink your opponents, using your mind rather than your strength. Ethan didn't flinch. I'm ready, Your Highness. Zarya couldn't help but notice that his words were never boastful. He spoke with a quiet confidence that made her wonder about the true nature of the human race. There was no arrogance in his voice, no need to prove himself. It was as if he already knew what he was capable of. She led him to a large holographic table in the center of the room, where a simulated battlefield was projected. The table displayed a detailed map of a fictional planet, different terrain features, strategic positions, and enemy forces. Zarya explained the rules of the game. Strategic simulation that tested the ability to plan, adapt, and execute complex tactics. This will test your ability to lead, Zarya said. You will have to direct your forces to take control of key points, outmaneuver the enemy, and protect your resources. The simulation is set up to reflect real combat scenarios where every decision you make has consequences. Ethan studied the map for a moment, his brow furrowing slightly as he took in the details. Zarya watched him closely, waiting for him to make his move. Without hesitation, Ethan began to issue commands, directing his forces to secure a stronghold in the center of the map. He avoided rushing into a direct confrontation with the enemy, instead focusing on securing vital resources and cutting off the enemy's supply lines. It was a cautious approach, but one that made perfect sense. Zarya was impressed by his tactics. They were unconventional, but they worked. Slowly, Ethan gained the upper hand, capturing key positions while minimizing casualties. His forces were well coordinated, and he was able to outmaneuver the enemy at every turn. For a moment, Zarya wondered if he had been trained in some way she hadn't considered. Was there more to this human soldier than just raw talent? Was there a strategy? To his calmness? To his quiet confidence? As the simulation neared its end, Ethan had successfully gained control of the battlefield, neutralizing the enemy forces with minimal effort. Zarya stood motionless, her mind racing. She had expected to see the human struggle, to watch him falter, but instead, she had witnessed a brilliant display of tactical brilliance, one that rivaled the best minds of her own people. She felt something shift within her, something she hadn't expected. This was no ordinary human. This was someone who possessed an unexpected intelligence, a quiet brilliance that had gone unnoticed by those who had underestimated him. Zarya finally spoke, her voice steady but laced with surprise. Well done, human. You've proven yourself in a way I did not expect. Ethan looked up, his eyes meeting hers, and for the first time, she saw a hint of something more in his gaze. Perhaps, or maybe even a subtle challenge. I'm just doing my best. Your Highness, he said quietly, as though the victory didn't matter to him as much as the challenge itself. Zarya couldn't help but feel a growing sense of respect for him. The human soldier had shown her that there was more to his kind than she had ever imagined. And for the first time, she wondered, if humans could achieve so much with so little, what else were they capable of? Days passed, and Zarya's thoughts lingered on the human soldier. Ethan's performance in the strategic test had left her in awe, but she refused to let herself be fully impressed. The princess of a great alien race was not supposed to admire the abilities of a human. Yet every time she saw him, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to him than he let on. Zarya had seen him complete the strength test. She had watched him conquer the agility challenge, and now, after the intellectual simulation, she couldn't ignore the quiet brilliance he displayed. Every move he made was calculated, and he seemed to possess an intuitive understanding of tactics that defied his small, unassuming appearance. She found herself facing a difficult truth. Humans were far more complex than she had ever given them credit for. Still, Zaria remained steadfast in her belief that her people were superior. They were stronger, faster, and more advanced. Humans were small and fragile, and their strength, no matter how impressive, could not outshine the technological and physical advantages her species had. But there was something inside her that pushed her to learn more. As much as she resisted, the curiosity continued to grow. Why was Ethan different? What made him stand out among the other humans? Zaria had to know. She called for him once again. This time, she wanted to see something different. She had seen his strength, his agility, and his intellect. What was it that lay beneath all of that? What was his true power? Ethan arrived as always, with his calm and composed demeanor. His uniform was simple, yet it somehow suited him. He walked into the chamber, his eyes meeting Zaria's without hesitation, but there was something different in his gaze this time. It was as if he understood the weight of the questions she had in her mind. "Your Highness," he said, his voice polite as ever. "You called for me?" Zaria nodded, her gaze never leaving his. "Yes, Ethan, I want to see something different. Today, I've seen your physical strength, your intelligence, and your resilience. But now, I want to see who you are beneath all of that." Ethan's eyes flickered with understanding, though he said nothing in response. He simply waited for her instructions. Zaria hesitated, unsure how to ask the question that had been building in her mind. She had spent so long believing that strength and intellect were the most important qualities in a warrior. But now with Ethan, she was beginning to understand that there was something more, something far deeper, that she hadn't considered. She walked over to a nearby console, bringing up a holographic display. It was a map of an ancient human city, filled with detailed images of buildings, streets, and landmarks. The city had once been a great center of human civilization, but now it lay in ruins, destroyed by war and time. "This is Earth," she said, her voice quieter now. "The city of your people? Tell me, what happened here?" Ethan looked at the hologram for a long moment before speaking. "It was destroyed by a war," he replied, his voice calm but heavy with the weight of the history. "A war that nearly wiped out humanity. Many of the people who lived here are gone. The destruction. It left us all broken in ways I can't even describe." Zaria's brow furrowed. "And yet your people survived. You rebuilt. Why?" Ethan's gaze softened as he met her eyes. "Because we had to. We had no choice. We fight for survival. We fight for those who are still here, for those who have lost everything. We fight because we are resilient, and no matter what happens, we keep going." Zaria could hear the sincerity in his voice. She could see the weight of the words in his eyes. There was something in Ethan that she hadn't seen in any of her own people. Something raw, something that could not be measured by strength or intellect alone. It was a quiet, unyielding will to survive. "What makes you different from the rest of your people?" Zaria asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan took a step forward, his expression serious. "Nothing, Your Highness. I'm just a man, like every other human. But the strength you see in me is something that's built into all of us. It's not about being strong in one moment. It's about having the will to keep going when the odds are against you." Zaria felt a strange shift in her chest as she listened to him. His words, so simple and honest, struck a chord within her. It was a kind of strength that she hadn't realized existed, and it was this strength that had allowed humanity to endure when others might have given up. "You are different," Zaria said softly. "Not because of your strength or your intelligence, but because of your spirit. You don't give up. And that is something I have never seen in any other species." Ethan smiled, though it was small and almost humble. "I think it's just part of being human." Zaria stared at him, her thoughts a jumble of conflicting emotions. She had come here seeking to understand what made him stand out. What she hadn't expected was to discover that it wasn't just his abilities that made him special. It was the depth of his character, his unwavering spirit, that set him apart from anyone she had ever met. As the silence stretched between them, Zaria realized that she had been wrong about humans. She had thought they were weak, fragile, and insignificant. But now she could see that they were capable of far more than anyone, including herself, had ever imagined in that moment. Something changed between them. Zarya no longer saw Ethan as just a soldier, nor as a human to be tested and challenged. She saw him as an equal, someone whose strength came not from the body, but from the heart. And for the first time, Zarya found herself deeply uncertain about the future, about what it meant to be part of a race that considered itself superior. Perhaps, just perhaps, it was time for her to learn from this human, to embrace the lessons he had unknowingly taught her. As Zarya turned to leave the room, she glanced back at Ethan one last time. There was no mocking smile on her face, no condescending thoughts in her mind, only a newfound respect for the human soldier who had, in the most unexpected way, changed her view of the universe. Zarya sat alone in her chamber, her thoughts swirling in a chaotic whirl. Ethan's words echoed in her mind. We fight for survival. We fight for those who are still here, for those who have lost everything. She couldn't forget how. His voice had softened as he spoke of humanity's resilience. It was a strength unlike any she had seen in her own people, for the first time since arriving on Earth. Zarya found herself questioning the foundation of everything she had believed. Her people were strong, yes, but they had never faced the kind of adversity that humans had. They had always been able to rely on their advanced technology, their powerful warriors, and their superior intellect. They had never been forced to rebuild from the ground up, to fight with every last ounce of strength simply to survive. And yet, Ethan had told her that humans did exactly that every day. They had rebuilt, they had fought, and they had endured. The idea of fighting for survival, fighting not just for themselves but for the future of their species, was something that struck deep within her. Zarya had always believed that her race was destined to dominate the galaxy. But now, she couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that perhaps her people weren't as invincible as they had once thought. Perhaps there was more to strength than just physical power and advanced technology. Perhaps true strength was something deeper. The sound of footsteps broke Zarya's thoughts. She turned to see Ethan standing in the doorway, his posture relaxed, but his expression unreadable. He hadn't come to challenge her this time. She could tell by the way he stood that something had changed between them. You wanted to see me? Your Highness? Ethan asked, his voice as calm as ever. Zarya nodded, her heart beating a little faster than usual. She had always seen him as just another test subject, another soldier to prove her point. But now, something was different. She had learned so much from him, and she knew that if she was to truly understand humans, if she was to truly see them for what they were, she would have to stop viewing them through the lens of superiority. Yes. Ethan, Zarya replied, her voice softer than before. I need your help. Ethan raised an eyebrow. My help? With what, Your Highness? Zarya stood and walked over to the window, her hands clasped behind her back as she gazed out at the stars. We're facing a challenge, Ethan. Not just me, but my people. The galaxy has been in a state of balance for centuries, and now everything is changing. There are threats we've never seen before, forces that could destroy everything we've built. Ethan listened quietly, his eyes never leaving her. Zarya could feel his gaze, steady and unwavering. I need someone who understands resilience. Someone who knows what it means to fight when there's nothing left to lose, Zarya continued. And I think that person is you. Blinked, clearly surprised by her words. You're asking me to help your people? Zarya turned to face him, her expression serious. Yes, I believe that humanity can offer something my people need. A strength we've never known. The will to fight, to endure, no matter the cost. My people, ... We've grown complacent. We've relied too much on our technology and our power. We've lost something vital along the way. I need you to show us what we've forgotten. Ethan looked at her for a long moment, considering her words. Then he nodded. I'll help you, Your Highness. But I can't do it alone. We'll need to work together. Zarya felt a strange warmth spread through her chest. She hadn't expected him to agree so easily. But there it was, an unspoken understanding between them. For the first time, she saw him not as an outsider, not as a human to be tested, but as an equal. Together, they would face the challenges ahead. I know, Zarya said, her voice steady. That's why I'm asking for your partnership, Ethan. Not just for your strength, but for your wisdom. For your experience. We need to unite our strengths, human and alien alike, if we are to survive what's coming. Ethan stepped closer, his expression now serious. Then let's get to work, Your Highness. Whatever it takes. Zarya felt the weight of his words. This wasn't just about diplomacy or proving a point anymore. It wasn't about testing humans to see if they were worthy. It was about survival. It was about something far bigger than her pride or her people's power. It was about the future of the galaxy as they stood there. The two of them, human and alien Zarya, realized that she had been wrong all along. Strength was not about dominance, not about being the biggest or the strongest. True strength was about unity. It was about recognizing the value in each other, no matter how different they seemed on the surface. They would face whatever threats came together. As unlikely as it seemed, Zarya knew that she had found an ally in Ethan. And maybe, just maybe, humans were not as small as she had once thought. Over the next few days, Zarya and Ethan began to strategize. They worked late into the night, drawing up plans and discussing tactics. Ethan shared what he knew about human history, the wars they had fought, the ways they had learned to adapt and survive. Zarya, in turn, taught him about her peoples, history, their technology, and their military strategies. It wasn't easy. There were moments of disagreement, moments when their different ways of thinking clashed. But there was always respect between them. They listened to each other, and slowly, they began to understand how their strengths could complement each other. The first major test came sooner than expected. A fleet of unknown ships appeared on the edges of the galaxy, moving closer. With alarming speed, it was clear they had come for war. Zarya knew that this was their moment, her people's moment, to prove that they could adapt, they could fight, not just with strength, but with the kind of resilience that Ethan had shown her. This is it, Zarya said, standing before the holographic map. We fight together, human and alien, for the galaxy, for our survival. Ethan nodded, his expression calm, but his eyes were filled with determination. Let's show them what we're made of. Together, they would face the unknown. Together, they would defend their people, their homes, and everything they held dear. The threat was real. It wasn't just a matter of pride anymore. Zarya stood on the observation deck of the flagship, staring out at the vast emptiness of space where the enemy fleet had been detected. Yes. The ships were unlike anything she had seen before, arc, imposing, and strangely silent. No communications had come from them, no demands or warnings. Just the presence of their ships, slowly drawing closer to the heart of her empire. Zarya could feel the tension in the air, thick and heavy. Her people, who had never known defeat, were now facing an unknown enemy that seemed to defy their understanding of warfare. The enemy's ships were advanced, faster and more agile than anything her people had developed. The princess was no longer confident that her military might alone could protect her people. This was a new kind of challenge, one that her people had not been prepared for. Your Highness, a voice broke through her thoughts. Zarya turned to find Ethan standing in the doorway, his expression as calm as always. Despite the gravity of the situation, there was something in his eyes that brought a sense of peace. I've gone over the enemy ship's movements. We have a window of opportunity. Zarya looked at him, surprised by the calmness in his voice. Despite the overwhelming situation, he didn't seem shaken. His eyes were clear, focused. Was a trait she had come to admire in him. Tell me, she said, stepping aside to allow him in. Ethan walked over to the holographic table, where a projection of the enemy fleet's movements was displayed. They're fast, but they lack coordination. They're acting like individual ships, not as a united force. If we can divide them, we can neutralize their strength. Zarya nodded, studying the data. How do we do that? Ethan glanced at her, his expression thoughtful. We can use our ships as bait, draw them into a trap. Their ships are fast, but they can't think ahead. They rely on brute force, and if we can turn that against them, we'll have the advantage. Zarya frowned. Bait. You want us to risk our ships just to trick them? Ethan met her gaze. Sometimes you have to show them the wrong move to force them into the right one. You have to take risks to win. Zaria's heart raced. Wasn't the strategy she would have chosen, but Ethan was right. The enemy was powerful, but they weren't invincible. This was the kind of thinking that her people had. Lacked humans didn't just rely on strength, they relied on their ability to adapt. To think outside the box, she thought back to their conversations over the last few days, where Ethan had shared stories of battles on Earth. Humans didn't always have the biggest or the strongest armies, but they had learned to fight smarter, to outthink their enemies. It was this strength, their ability to learn and adapt, that made them so dangerous. "All right," Zaria said, her voice steady. "We'll do it your way. But we'll need all of our resources working together. Can you help coordinate with my fleet?" Ethan nodded. "We'll need everyone on the same page, but I can handle it. I've seen how your people work. You know strategy just as well as anyone. It's just about putting it into action." As the hours passed, Zaria and Ethan worked side by side preparing the plan. Zaria had always been the one in charge. As a princess, she had always given the orders. But now she found herself leaning on Ethan's ideas, his experience, and his calm approach. Together, they built a plan that relied on deception and surprise, one that would force the enemy to play into their hands. The time came for the battle. Zaria stood on the bridge of her flagship, watching as her fleet prepared to engage. The enemy ships were closing in, their weapons charged, ready to strike. Zaria could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. This wasn't just a test of strength. It was a test of everything she had learned in the past few days. It was a test of trust. "Everything is ready," Ethan said, stepping up beside her. She nodded. "Let's do this," as the first shots were fired. Zaria's fleet moved into position. The enemy reacted immediately, chasing after the ships that had been baited into the trap. Zaria's heart pounded as the plan unfolded. It was risky, but it was working. The enemy had taken the bait. Now, it was time to strike. Zaria gave the order to fire, and her fleet opened fire, targeting the flanks of the enemy ships. Battle was intense, with explosions lighting up the dark void of space. But Ethan's plan was in motion, and the enemy, caught off guard, was struggling to regain control. Their ships, though fast, lacked the coordination needed to counter the assault. Zaria's heart raced as she watched the enemy fleet falter. They were losing ground. The tide was turning. She could hardly believe it. Her people, with all their advanced technology and firepower, had done the impossible. They were winning, but as the battle continued, Zaria found herself thinking back to something Ethan had said. "We fight for those who are still here, for those who have lost everything." This fight was more than just about power. It was about survival. It was about protecting everything that mattered. And in that moment, Zaria realized that it wasn't just the strength of her fleet or the power of her people that had won the battle. It was the spirit of those who had the will to survive, to keep fighting, no matter the odds. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the last of the enemy ships were disabled. Zaria let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. They had done it. Against all odds, they had won. Her people were safe. But more than that, she had learned something vital. She turned to Ethan, who was watching the battlefield. With his usual calm, "You were right," Zaria said softly. "It wasn't about strength. It was about how we think, and how we fight together." Ethan smiled, his eyes warm with understanding. "We all have a part to play, Your Highness. You just have to find the right way to work together." Zaria nodded. "And we will. Together." As the victory was celebrated, Zaria looked at Ethan with newfound respect. He had shown her that strength came in many forms, not just in power or technology, but in resilience, intelligence, and unity. It was this kind of strength that would carry them through whatever came next.